Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the Northeast Connected. I'm your host, Kevin Longley. We're talking Washington football team 2021 NFL draft. An epic weekend just concluded as the draft concluded in Cleveland, Ohio this weekend. The whole NFC East did a pretty good job with their draft. I have to say, all four teams, not too many head scratchers. There's always one or two on every squad. But I was impressed with everybody this weekend, and it was a very fun eventful weekend. And obviously, the NFC East, as always, made some big noise. But today, I'm going to focus on the Washington football team, the reigning division champs, who started off their draft at 19th overall, last of the group, and ended up with 10 draft picks this year. So it was an eventful day for them. A lot of talk about whether or not they were going to move up to get a quarterback, get their quarterback of the future. Are they going to move up for Justin Fields? Are they going to move up for Mac Jones? Could Trey Lance fall? We found a lot of that to be different, right? A lot of smoke and mirrors about what San Francisco might do at number 3. A lot of people thought it would be Mac Jones. I said on our last podcast that I was not going to turn down what Adam Schefter says, but it's hard to believe you would give up a haul like that for Mac Jones. Not to say he can't succeed, but it's a lot to give up for a guy who's not too different than Jimmy Garoppolo. But San Francisco makes the right move. They get Trey Lance, so that fall ends before it begins. And Justin Fields did fall a little bit. And so one NFC East team, the New York Giants, sitting there at number 11, ended up trading to 20 with the Chicago Bears so that the Bears could get potentially their first good quarterback ever. Not to throw any shade on Sid Luckman, who back in the olden days was an all-time great, but in the even remotely modern era of NFL football, they have not had a quarterback really worth touting. So Justin Fields has that ability, and they do have at least a couple weapons there. And Nagy was once considered like the great offensive mind. He had that McVay type of swagger to him after year one when he led them to, I believe it was 13-3. So people thought he could be a great offensive coach. He hasn't really had the tools. Now the excuses are kind of up. So very interesting and an interesting move for the Giants. Moved back 9 spots and still had a very strong draft. But Washington obviously was not going to be able to trade with an NFC East rival to move up and get their franchise quarterback. There's no one up in the Meadowlands that would have been okay with dealing back, no matter what the haul was for Washington. If they get Justin Fields and Fields turns into the next Russell Wilson, the next Kyler Murray, one of those types of guys, there's some people that believe Justin Fields could be the best quarterback of this class, including Trevor Lawrence. I personally believe he could be better than Zach Wilson. So you're not if that's what it took, if it took trading up to that 10 through 12 spot where it went Dallas, New York, Philly, and if that's what it took to get Justin Fields, Washington was always out. It was never going to happen. Ron Rivera has said after the draft, that they felt strongly against trading up. That maybe there's some truth to that. I could kind of believe it, but at the same time, I gotta imagine if Justin Fields slips to 13 with the Chargers, there's some sort of package you could put together to move up and get a franchise guy and avoid these questions that Washington's now going to have for the next year. All eyes are going to be on the quarterback position in Washington. That's just the fact of the matter, because it's the only really unresolved thing after what was a very strong draft by Washington. There's several top experts, top scouts. Matt Miller, formerly of Bleacher Report, was one who considered Washington to have one of the best drafts. There were several great analysts who really thought that Washington nailed this draft. Greg Cosell, one of the great evaluators the game has ever had, loved the Jamin Davis pick at 19, even though some people were a little hesitant about it. So Washington had a great draft, and after having a couple great drafts over the past couple years, this is a team that does not have hardly any holes. Honestly, there are some holes that could open in the future, right? Logan Thomas could leave at tight end, and then you need to fill that gap. Brandon Sheriff most likely gone at the end of the year because he's turned down multiple contract extension offers. That could leave a gap. So there are always gaps that could occur, right? There could be injuries that occur, guys who don't pan out. teams get all excited about all the picks they had. Washington had 10 this year. The reality is at least 6 or 7 of them are probably not going to pan out. That's just the statistical backing of this whole charade, right? We get so excited about the draft. Every pick is amazing. Every pick's better than the last, and then at least 2/3 of them are not going to really be a factor. So, yes, there could be other holes that appear, but really, Pro Football Focus ranked the Washington football team's offensive line in 2020 ninth overall. The receivers were an issue, but then in free agency, they signed Curtis Samuel and Adam Humphries. Cornerback could have been an issue, but then they upgraded to William Jackson III to pair with Kendall Fuller. That's now a great pairing. Safety was looking like an issue last year until Cameron Curl emerged and Jeremy Reeves looked like he could play. And DeShazer Everett was actually having a fairly strong middle of the season before he got hurt last year. So there's not a lot to point to. The big thing coming into this draft was linebacker, and potentially what can we do about left tackle, and then the long-term answers at quarterback, right? With Ryan Fitzpatrick coming in, Fitzpatrick is not a long-term answer, and he's going to lose the football team or Washington a couple games that should be won. That's just the way it is. He's going to throw them out of some games that could be won because he's a gunslinger, which means he's going to throw picks. He could have 3-4 interception games, and so that will cost them, but he's also going to have games where Washington is still in it in a shootout, which could not have been said last year. They had to win games 20-17, 17-10. You're not going to be. You could be in a position where Washington can put up 40 points, 35 points, 38 points when you have a guy like Fitzpatrick throwing to these new weapons that they have. So he's an okay fix for now. He's an upgrade over what was there in 2020 and 2019. So it's positive steps forward. But now all eyes are going to be on quarterback because there was that speculation that Washington could be in the running for moving up. They did not. They stay pat, and they draft one of my favorite people in the draft by the name of Jamin Davis, which I did need some clarification on how that was pronounced. I've been saying Jamin Davis for the longest time. I had Bob Marley playing all weekend. We were Jamin. But no, that is not how you pronounce his name. It's Jamin Davis, and he is an absolute athletic marvel, a freak at the position at 6'3", 234 pounds with a long wingspan, an 11-foot broad jump. And oh yeah, he runs a sub 440, 4.40, I should say. It's a lot of fours. That's faster than Terry McLaurin, I might add. That's faster than almost any tight end you're going to see in the NFL, who he's largely going to be put up against. I mean, that is the type of speed that can allow you to keep up with the running backs in the division who are great at catching out of the backfield. Miles Sanders, when healthy, is great at catching out of the backfield. Tony Pollard can catch out of the backfield. Don't really have to worry about Zeke all that much there. And then Saquon is one of the absolute best in the business when he's healthy. And you need someone who can track that. Washington has gotten killed by not having guys that can also track running quarterbacks. I mean, it has been the ultimate detriment to this team. You got this kick-ass defensive line up front that is winning all their battles, all their gaps. They're dominating the trenches, but it is not the job of 4 defensive linemen to wall off the entire defense. They need to win their gaps, win their battles, but that's going to leave some gaps. It's 4 versus 5. And the linebackers need to clean up. They need to clean up in the running game. They need to stay honest when you're playing against a mobile quarterback like a Dak Prescott. Kind of funny to say, but kind of like Daniel Jones. He can run. Like Jalen Hurts. You need someone who can track them. You saw with Washington last year, it looked like their defense was the second coming of the 2002 Bucks against Philly last year. The very next week, they go to Arizona, play against Kyler Murray, and Kyler Murray was running circles around them. He looked like Toad in Mario Kart, just doing laps around everybody, because while Chase Young was winning his battle and Montez Sweat was winning his battle and Allen and Payne were doing their thing in the middle, there would be a little sliver for a little 5'6", 5'7" Kyler Murray to slip through, and then you didn't have anyone athletic enough at the linebacker position to make the stop. Jamin Davis changes that. Jamin Davis can go toe-to-toe with anybody. He had incredible tape against Florida last year, going against Kadarius Toney, who went to New York at 20, and will have to face Jamin Davis twice a year, as well as Kyle Pitts, largely considered the greatest tight end draft prospect of all time by Mel Kiper, Todd McShay, and anybody who was analyzing this said in 40 years they haven't seen somebody like Kyle Pitts. And while Kyle Pitts had a great game in every game he played, when he was lined up with Jamin Davis, he really didn't have a huge impact because Davis has that long wingspan and the size to keep up with bigger tight ends, but he also has great speed and change of direction ability. 40-yard dashes, they don't matter all that much. We did see a few highlights with Jamin Davis where he's tracking a running back on a wheel route all the way down the sideline, and he's just toe-to-toe with them, just taking out that route. So obviously that top line speed matters, but that's why I pointed out that 11-foot broad jump. That shows the most explosiveness of all the big drills. And Davis, I mean, he's off the charts. He jumps off the charts in this regard. And so to get a guy like that who can be a spy for these quarterbacks and allow Washington to play a little more free because they got somebody who can track Dak Prescott, a guy who can go toe-to-toe with Evan Engram down the seams, as well as now keeping up with Kadarius Toney. New York just has a ton of weapons. It's something that Washington has really never had, honestly. As much grief as people like to give Washington over the past couple decades or 3 decades, and it is very much deserved. This is a franchise that has prided itself on defense. In the 2000s, the offense was always sputtering, right? There's maybe 1 or 2 good offensive years, but it was always a sputtering 17, 20 point a game type of offense. But for most of the 2000s, Washington prided itself on a top 10 defense. They're just now getting back to that. Once the Shanahan era took over, the defense really went downhill. And then obviously Jay Gruden couldn't pick a defensive coordinator to save his life, or maybe he was trying to save his life by not bringing in anyone that could threaten him for his position. That's probably more likely. So now you have this extraordinary defense that had one big glaring weakness: linebacker. A lot of stone-footed linebackers last year that were getting beat over the middle. Linebackers, when you think about coverage these days, they factor in just as much as any position. Because if you can't have someone that can guard these exceptional route running tight ends now and these exceptional route running backs, it doesn't matter how good your defensive line is because the ball is going to be out of the quarterback's hands before you know it. And it doesn't matter how good the secondary is because they're just going to attack over the middle and in short yardage situations. So sure, maybe you're taking out the big play, but teams are just going right down the field, much like how New England used to play, just targeting Gronk and Edelman right there. And there's so many linebackers that aren't capable of that. In the modern NFL, that's what you need to be able to guard against. So there was a lot of talk about Washington targeting this position if quarterback wasn't going to be an option, which it turned out to not be. Mac Jones was the last of the 5 for the first round, and he went to New England at number 15. And I'm not sure he's someone that Ron Rivera would have wanted anyway. Rivera values athletic, mobile quarterbacks. And so there was some talk about Jeremiah Owusu-Akua. I totally I totally butchered his name. As soon as Washington didn't pick him, I just wiped having to learn that name off my brain. So that's part of the reason I'm excited for this. I don't have to pronounce that. But JOK, who fell. I mean, he really fell. A lot of people mocked JOK out of Notre Dame, the linebacker who's 6'1", kind of a tweener. A little too small to be a linebacker, but a little too heavy to be a safety. But we've seen that work in the NFL, right? And there's definitely value there. And he's great in coverage and super explosive, but he really fell. He did not go 19 to Washington. He actually fell all the way to Cleveland in the second round in the 40s. So quite a drop for JOK. And Jamin Davis, who plays a similar style, but is a little bit bigger. He's got the height, he's got the length, he's got an extra 20 pounds on him, and was more of a late bloomer. Is the pick for Washington at 19. So the way I see him getting used, obviously his main strength will be in the passing game. He's shown an ability to blitz the quarterback. He's shown an ability to dodge blockers, so he can really get back there quickly. as well as track the quarterback. But he can really guard in short yardage situations. Kadarius Toney is being compared to a Tyreek Hill type of player, just super explosive out of the slot. That is not the type of guy you want a linebacker keyed up against. And yet, if you watch the Florida versus Kentucky All-22 last year, Jamin Davis is right there with him. And there's several times where Kyle Trask, the quarterback of Florida, is looking to go to Toney with his first read, and the option is just not there. Davis has it completely walled off because he can turn his hips super fluidly, and then he's got that straight line speed to keep up. So it's really impressive in that regard. He's a military kid, which obviously appeals to Ron Rivera. He's good, not great in the run game. He could use some shoring up his tackling, but he's a very raw prospect in regards to the fact that he really exploded onto the scene in 2020. So that was one part of the knock on him, right? Like, we didn't know about this guy hardly at all before 2020. He was sub 200 pounds when he got to Kentucky, so there was some concerns about weight. But I like to see people whose trajectory is headed upwards, right? And that's what you get with Jamin Davis. You get a guy, he was the only one in college football last year, the only player to have over 100 tackles and 3 interceptions. So it shows that he was cleaning up in the run game. He really shows a great ability to slip blockers and work angles in his favor so that he's not just taking on these giant brutes of the offensive line and can really wrap up running backs. And so he's not a major hitter. And he did miss some tackles, but he showed improvement in that regard. And so I think he's a really strong pick and adds something that Washington's defense desperately needed. There's some critique about Washington going defense at all because defense was their strength last year. But my philosophy has always been, if your strength is something you rely on to win every week, you better damn sure make sure that strength can carry you week in and week out. And when you have a liability at the whole second level of the defense, that puts you in a position where you can be out of games fast. You know, you look at the Tampa Bay game in the playoffs last year between the Bucs and Washington, and that ended up being a close game. But Washington's offense actually played really well. Taylor Heineke played really well, and the defense gave up over 500 yards of offense to Tom Brady and the Bucs. And by the way, several drives were killed by drops, primarily on Chris Godwin. There were 3 drives just in the second half that ended because of a drop on third down that would have been a wide open, like, gimme first down, hit right in the chest, and the ball just dropped. That 500 yards could have been 600 yards. And that game that ended up being close could have been a 20 to 30 point blowout if just a couple more catches are made, because it was a blowout in the first half, and it took a few of those drive-ending drops for Washington to get back into the game. So you still need to address this side of the football, right? And so they did. I think that was a home run pick. Some people thought it was a little too early, but regardless, I highly doubt he would have made it out of the 20s. And he was Rivera's guy, so you got to get him. And the pro comp for him, I've seen Darius Leonard. Levante David is probably a little more accurate. He's got a little more height than David, but those are both Pro Bowl linebackers, and so I think they're going to make a huge impact. Now, allow me to pontificate for a minute. As we get to the second round pick of Sam Cosmi, an offensive lineman, which was out of the University of Texas in Austin, Texas, which was much needed for Washington, as there's a lot of questions about the long-term answer at left tackle, despite Cornelius Lucas playing fairly strongly in 2020. So I'm going to channel my inner Matthew McConaughey in his recent book, Green Lights, to introduce Sam Cosmi. Prescription. To negate the offensive line is to negate oneself. They are the gatekeepers, the tone setters, the clearers of the path for the greats to follow. They define grit before glory, for glory is not possible without their lead. A stellar offensive line builds the bust we see in Canton, often without receiving busts of their own. They are unheralded, but still heroic, creating Goliaths out of Davids, legends out of mortals. While the offensive line might not be the group that gets your juices flowing in the morning, their failure will have entire organizations looking pale in the face. They must be maintained, nurtured, for that is one check engine light that you will put an entire journey on your pause. Greatness in the NFC East has largely predicated on the dominance of the big boys up front. The Dallas Cowboys won 3 Super Bowls in the 1990s on the backs of one of the greatest offensive lines the game has ever seen, while the Washington Redskins won 3 Super Bowls in the 1980s and early 90s behind the Hogs, the one mainstay on a team that won the big game 3 times with 3 different quarterbacks. The offensive line is in our blood. It's our root. And for that reason, the Washington football team grabbed its future by the longhorn. That's right. Call it a cosmic intervention of sorts, as they selected left tackle Sam Cosmi out of the University of Texas. Go Longhorns. All right. Now that I've gotten off I entertained myself for a couple of minutes. Sam Cosmi. Is he as good as a Matthew McConaughey monologue? He can be. He's got the right mentality. He is a mauler. He will throw punches. He's definitely got that grit, the grit that can lead to glory. He's super athletic. He's got a better 40 time and more speed than the tight end Washington grabbed in the 4th round. Very athletic, and he's a big guy. He's 6'6" at 315. Doesn't have super long arms. Isn't super strong. He's not an elite athlete, but he's a good athlete. But what makes up for a little bit of a lack of power necessarily is that quickness, which is going to be good for those edge rushers at the next level. He's also a guy that has played right tackle and left tackle and can play guard. So he's got that positional versatility that Rivera and company love so much. The way I see him being used is I think they really want to make it work at left tackle for Cosmi because they just brought in Eric Flowers and they have Sadiq Charles and they have Wes Schweitzer, all of which could be answers at guard, assuming Brandon Sheriff is gone next year. If he's not, then they're overloaded at guard. So they would love to make Cosmi work at left tackle, but he at least has the ability to play in any of the 5 or at least 4 of the 5 positions on the offensive line. What's also great about him is his Pro Football Focus grade went up every year he was in college. As I said, I like to see that trajectory. Just like Jamin Davis exploded onto the scene in 2020, Sam Cosmi is a 3-year starter that just got better and better and better. He is loved on his team. People love this guy's personality. Great video of him and his family being told they were going to be the next members of the Washington football team by Coach Rivera. I think he can be a home run. The 2 things working against him. One is kind of on him, and it's the fact that, the power game, sometimes he can lunge a little bit, get lost in his technique, which you do not want. And that can get you beat in the NFC East or anywhere in the NFL with elite pass rushers. It won't be as big of a deal with the average pass rushers because he's got the right athleticism. But some of those elite pass rushers, if they catch you leaning a little bit, you can definitely be just tossed to the side quickly. Secondly, this has nothing to do with him, unfortunately. But the Washington football team does not have a great track record in the 2nd round. In my lifetime, there has not been a single 2nd round pick that panned out. The closest has been Preston Smith, who was good, but up and down enough to where Washington made no effort to re-sign him and allowed him to go to Green Bay. And he has had more success in Green Bay. But before knocking Washington for letting him go, he was really effective for about 6 to 7 games a year and completely non-existent for another 6 to 7 games a year. And not to mention he missed a couple games with injury as well. So really terrible luck in the 2nd round. I was hoping they would take someone I didn't even like in the 2nd round, so I wouldn't feel affected by the time we see a potential bust in place. But Sam Cosmi has all the tools to be successful. It's just a matter of putting him in the right places. And Washington's offensive line is very well coached, so I have high hopes for him. Really think he could be a long-term answer there, but he can also take his time because Cornelius Lucas did his thing last year and could start immediately, and the guard position is loaded. The right tackle position is set with Morgan Moses, and Chase Roullier ranked 4th according to Pro Football Focus of all centers in 2020. So the offensive line is in pretty good shape, even without Cosme. So he can take a little bit of time to get used to his new role in the NFL. Now, the third round things got a little interesting. Washington kicked it off with Benjamin St-Juste, which I do not know if I pronounced that correctly, but we're just going to roll with it. A cornerback out of Minnesota. And he's a bigger guy. He is 6'3", with good arm length and a little over 200 pounds. Decent amount of speed as well. I personally had not heard of him before the draft, but looking into him, he's got good ball skills and he does have good speed, but he has a little bit of difficulty in terms of swinging his hips, change of direction. So you do worry about that as a corner. My belief is that you're going to see St-Juste or Justy, however you say it. You're going to see him playing deep at the safety position, where that's what Washington needs the most. And he could very easily be used in nickel packages. He could be a successful cornerback, but I think that height, as well as that straight line speed that he has, and very strong ball skills, would be very effective at a free safety position, which is where Washington really lacks. They have some great box safety options between Landon Collins and Cameron Curl, but St-Juste or Juiced, he could maybe play a little bit deeper, and that's where Washington has had some struggles. So that was kind of a head scratcher at the 3rd round pick, but someone that could pay off for them, and at least provide some much needed depth in the secondary, where Washington's good as far as starters go, but could definitely use some depth. Now, the 3rd round pick that knocked fans off their feet was Dyami Brown out of North Carolina. He was the 2nd pick in the 3rd round, and he is a blazer. He is a big playmaker, and to do a little throwback to the old Washington Redskins of the 1980s, reminds me a little bit of Gary Clark. Some people are bringing up Stephon Diggs. That'd obviously be a win. Or even Terry McLaurin. To me, he reminds me a bit of Gary Clark. He's 6 foot. He runs a 4.4 40. That is now 3 receivers for Washington that run 4.4 40s, between Terry McLaurin, Curtis Samuel, and now Dyami Brown. So those 3 guys bring a lot of speed. This is a fast unit, a really fast unit, and hopefully Antonio Gandy-Golden at 6'4" can have a bounce back year after being kind of non-existent as a rookie last year to give them that height. Cam Sims is another guy who's about 6'4", who gives them a height option, and they have very tall tight ends. So they do have some height out there, and speed really kills. Brown is great at catching the ball in traffic. He has exceptional ball skills in terms of when it's in the air and tracking it, as well as very good footwork. He really has a good understanding of where he is on the field, and so he's a very strong pick there. There were some people that had a 1st round grade for Brown, and the very least I saw was early to mid 2nd. So for them to get them late in the 3rd, that was a huge steal by Washington. I saw A+ grades for that all across the board, all over the internet. He's going to be a big weapon for them, and they were doing okay at receiver after getting Curtis Samuel in free agency. Now you can surely say that wide receiver is a big strength for them. So big play Brown, just down the beltway. It's not all you, Marquise. We now have one in Dyami Brown, so that's a big win for Washington. As we got to the 4th round, a bit of a head scratcher here. Washington addressed a need. They needed a tight end. They needed a number 2 tight end with Logan Thomas, not only to help create some more options for Scott Turner and his offense, but also to have some depth in case something happens to Logan Thomas, or if he doesn't return next year at the end of his contract. But their choice of John Bates out of Boise State could very well pay off. Bates is a great kid, hard worker, another guy who's just improved. He's big at 6'6". He's really strong, great blocker. So Antonio Gibson and company are really going to love him there. And he's got great hands. Todd McShay said he was the best natural pass catcher of any tight end in the class not named Kyle Pitts. So that's obviously a win. The problem is that he's slow. and is not an exceptional route runner. So he's really not going to factor into the passing game all that much. So that's why that's a bit of a head scratcher for me, because a guy like Brevin Jordan out of Miami, who is a natural pass catcher and a pretty explosive tight end, and Kenny Yeboah out of Ole Miss is someone that really grew on me because he could also block. And it was also big, but had great pass catching abilities, especially in traffic and going up and getting it. So the reason I'm not as high on John Bates is because I think he can truly excel as a number 2 tight end with that blocking ability, and because if he's in a short yardage situation and his hands touch the ball, you know he's going to reel it in. So that's great. The problem is if Logan Thomas leaves, you didn't get a guy that can replace Logan Thomas. You got a guy who's a good number 2. So I thought Kenny Yeboah and Brevin Jordan might be able to fill Thomas's shoes if he decides to leave. But if Washington keeps Logan Thomas, as he appears to be happy in DC, then they've got a pretty good unit. They do have depth. They'll be good for this year. That was an upgrade for this year, but in terms of long term, doesn't give them the flexibility that some other moves might have made. As we made it to round 5, Derek Forrest at safety was the pick. So that adds some more secondary help. Forrest is an exceptional athlete. You're seeing a trend here. Washington really wanted to upgrade the athletic abilities of their unit, and Forrest is no exception. He ranked as the 4th most athletic safety in the class, and one of the most athletic safeties over the past few years. Another bigger guy, and he can hit. Derek Forrest is a really good hitter. Had some struggles in coverage, and so that'll have to get cleaned up. But the athletic ability is there, and he's an easy contributor on special teams. He can make a great difference there, and provide some depth as someone that could, with all of his athletic abilities and the fact that he's a 6'2" guy, and he does have some ball skills, and he's a very willing hitter. He's someone who could definitely develop into someone with a major role on the team, but he's not there yet. He needs some polish. Round 6 got some backlash, but for people outside of the Beltway, Nick Sundberg was a local fan favorite, huge locker room presence as a long snapper. And you don't typically value long snappers as high as the 6th round, but Sundberg left. That leaves a hole. You don't notice a bad long snapper until you have one, right? Or you don't notice a good long snapper until they're gone. And so Washington does not want to find out. They drafted Cameron Cheeseman. Yes, there's a lot of puns coming out of that. Gouda pick for those of you who like puns, out of Michigan. And he's supposedly the best long snapper there was, but usually you can get the best long snapper with the last pick or undrafted. They said they could not wait. They need to make sure they lock down a long snapper. So they did. And I really don't have much analysis on this. I don't break down long snappers, but supposedly he's the best. So I guess they filled that hole. The 7th round, they were supposed to have 2 picks. They ended up making a trade with Philly to get a 6th round pick. That's how they got the long snapper, an additional 7th round pick, which they got by giving up a 5th rounder in 2022. Now, the 7th round was very interesting. They drafted William Bradley King, a linebacker out of Baylor, who's more of an edge rusher, who's a great athlete. A taller guy. He doesn't have a lot of moves in his arsenal, but he's really good at adjusting at the line of scrimmage. He's someone that he doesn't just lock into one move. He can make a lot of adjustments, and he's a great athlete. But the big win for Washington here was Shaka Toney out of Penn State, someone that a lot of people thought could go in the 4th round, 5th round. Somehow he falls to them in the 7th. And Shaka Toney is a freak of an athlete who's extremely explosive off the edge. I mean, he's like a track star firing off the line of scrimmage, and he's got several moves in his arsenal, and he's a great hitter. So Toney was a huge steal for Washington in the 7th round. And while getting a couple edge rushers when you have Chase Young and Montez Sweat doesn't sound like a huge need, it really is, because for one, you want to be able to rotate those guys in and out. And for two, Ryan Anderson is gone and Ryan Kerrigan is most likely gone, which leaves no backups for edge rushers. in Washington. So you need that in case of injury. You also need it just to give these guys a breather. And I think Tony can actually have a pretty big role. Bradley King is a bit more of a project. But the athletic ability is there. And if the athletic ability is there and you're on a great team with a great defensive coach, as they have with Del Rio and Rivera, you can potentially figure it out later. And then their last pick was Dax Milne, wide receiver out of BYU. He was Zach Wilson's go-to target at BYU, but doesn't have a great athletic profile. Some people think he could be the next Trey Quinn. For those of you who are keeping count, Trey Quinn might have had 1 or 2 effective games in his NFL career. He was another Ashburn favorite that people thought could really turn into the next Julian Edelman. Didn't exactly work that way. So I don't really expect much of anything to come out of Dax Milne. I think he's someone that can play football. I don't think he's going to be terrible. He's someone that can come in and maybe fill in some reps, but especially after adding Brown and Adam Humphries in free agency and Curtis Samuel, and they have Kelvin Harmon coming back and Antonio Gandy-Golden, Cam Sims still making a case for his role on the roster. Milne, he might not make the team. He might be a practice squad guy. I would not be surprised of that. And then finally, Jarrett Peterson, a local kid, a running back who's super explosive, a smaller guy, but a very explosive running back, kind of in that Chris Thompson mold. Got signed as an undrafted free agent by Washington as soon as the draft finished. And easy choice for him. He's a big Washington fan, used to go to the training camps. And so that was a good pickup because Patterson is someone that some people had going as high as the 5th or 6th round. They get him undrafted. So 11 players total headed to Washington at the end of this weekend. Overall, Washington added a ton of athleticism. They filled holes as well as anybody in the entire NFL over the course of this weekend. They got some high-impact players. No clear bona fide stars. Not like Chase Young the year before. Not like Jamar Chase this year or Penei Sewell and people of that nature. There's no clear stars that come from this group, but there's a lot of high impact players I'm expecting. And overall, to give an overall grade, drum roll, my grade for Washington's draft is a B+ following the draft. Obviously, you're supposed to wait 3 years to get an honest assessment, so we'll revisit in 2024. But for now, I'm giving it a B+. The only thing that keeps it from an A is I feel like that John Bates pick could have been used a lot better. The 4th round is a place where you're still getting starters, and Bates could end up being okay. I just don't see a high upside for him when there were high upside players. So that was questionable. I think the cornerback move was St. Just in the 3rd round. I think there were some better guys available. I'm not necessarily sure he's going to have a massive impact. Could be more of like a Fabian Moreau in that regard. However, he does have the athletic abilities and he has pretty good ball skills. So I wouldn't be surprised if he turned into something. And so I think that kind of holds them back. The long snapper move in the 6th round, also a little bit questionable. But overall, there's a very strong draft. You look up and down this Washington roster, it's hard to find big holes. It really is. I mean, you had the 9th ranked offensive line last year, and then you had Eric Flowers, who was exceptional as a guard, and then Sam Cosmi. So you had 2 guys in that mold. Sadiq Charles didn't factor in last year, but he was a highly touted rookie, so he's coming back. The receiver group was a big concern, but that's not a concern now. Quarterback was a concern, and it will be going forward, but for now, they upgraded to Fitzpatrick. The secondary has been improved with William Jackson III, and hopefully some of these additions in this draft make an impact. Linebacker, huge help with Jamin Davis. Could probably still use a little help. And then obviously the defensive line is the best in football. So really, the stage has been set. The stage has been set to go all in on the next quarterback. I am not a person who wants to sacrifice everything for quarterbacks. It's not how I roll. I like to have good teams. Oftentimes, the quarterbacks who consistently win are not that much better than the quarterbacks who don't, but it's the team around them that makes a big impact. And now this is a stellar group. This is a playoff group without a great quarterback. This could be a 10 to 11 win team with Ryan Fitzpatrick. So if you're in that situation and the team is young, right? So it's not even like you're mortgaging the future. Most of the team is very young. And so because of that, they're in a position where some of these disgruntled quarterbacks, Aaron, Deshaun, if he's, still allowed to play football, who knows? Russell Wilson maybe still, Derek Carr potentially. I don't know what they're doing in Las Vegas. Any of these guys could potentially be on the table. There's some easier to get than others. And I think it's time. I think it's time that they go all in. That the roster is loaded. We've seen other playoff teams give up multiple firsts and sustain success long after the fact. This team, I think, is more built than that, right? And so they really need to make their play. It doesn't necessarily have to happen now, but that is going to be the only conversation between here and the 2022 NFL draft is what they're doing about quarterback. That they are on the clock now. They are on the clock for their quarterback of the future because with all these other holes filled and with young athletic talents, they're all those are all contracts that are cheap now that are just going to get more expensive in a couple years. Some of those guys are going to leave to other teams, and you're going to wish that you had that quarterback in place to have been a contender because right now this is a Super Bowl contention roster with a great quarterback. It is a wild card playoff roster without one. So great offseason for Washington, really strong. They put themselves in a great position to repeat as NFC East champs, which hasn't been done in a couple decades, but they're in great position to do it. Now it's about setting up the future and actually playing for championships. And so that's where going after number 12, number 4, number 3, out in Seattle and Houston and Green Bay. Now's the time to make their move. But anyways, thank you all so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. This was the Northeast Connector. We will touch on other NFC East teams. I'll be joined by Wesley Taylor to break down Dallas's draft as well. I hope you all enjoyed it. Reach out to me with any questions, with any comments. I love interacting on Twitter at KLongley21. All right. Peace out, y'all.